Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of True Drew Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about the Silver Cobweb. So this is the 71st book in the Nancy Drew series, and it first came out in 1983. And you guessed correctly, this book has a lot to do with spiders. There's not like a ton of scary scenes with spiders. It just seems like the villains use a spider symbol to intimidate people and scare them, but it's not as scary as The Secret in the Old Attic, book number 21. And honestly, for someone like me who has severe arachnophobia, it's kind of funny that The Secret in the Old Attic is one of my favorite Nancy Drew books. I don't know. I think it's one of my favorites because the scary scenes in that book really hit home for me, because I don't want to be trapped in an attic alone with a poisonous spider. Like, count me out. But yeah, really, this is the first book in a long time where we've talked about spiders, unless maybe you count the Spider Sapphire mystery, which is book number 45, but that spider was kind of encased in a sapphire, so I don't know if that counts. So as always, we'll go ahead and discuss the book covers for the Silver Cobweb, and you may hear some rain. There's some rain pattering on the window here. It kind of adds to the ambiance. I feel like that is the perfect weather to talk about or read a mystery book. But if you ever want to see pictures of these book covers, I always post these on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast, on Wednesdays before the episodes air on Thursdays. And we've got 4 different book covers to talk about today. So the first edition that we have here, I believe this is a Ruth Sanderson book cover, and it shows Nancy holding up this silver necklace that looks a lot like a cobweb, and then we have a superimposed cobweb behind her with a huge looking spider. Like, I don't like this at all, one bit. Like, if this were near my house, I would have to like spray and fumigate. But Nancy herself is wearing what looks to be like a denim skirt, maybe. We can only see part of it. She's wearing a collared shirt that's tucked into that, and she's got almost like a mullet going on, like very puffed up hair in the front and smoothed in the back, so very 80s hairstyle. I actually have this cover edition, and I also have this second cover edition, which is a later one, and Nancy is wearing jeans and a red sweatshirt over a collared shirt. She's got longer, more smooth blonde hair, like no mullets here, and she's next to a bunch of boxes of dynamite, and one of them's getting ready to fall on top of her, and she's got her signature flashlight. And the tagline for this one says, "Nancy is caught in a web of deadly intrigue." I love a good spider pun. Now, the third book cover is one where Nancy is more in the foreground. She's wearing a red shirt, and she's got the necklace. This is probably the clearest cover where we see the necklace, and it really does look like a silver cobweb with a spider in the center of it. And Nancy's got shorter blonde hair, and there's a man behind her who is kind of bracing himself because there's a rock being thrown through a window at him. And the tagline for this one, it's not as clever. It just says, "Nancy stands on the cutting edge of danger." I guess because there's glass getting ready to be thrown at her from this breaking window, but I like the first pun better. And then the fourth and final book cover, and this is a UK edition, and you know how I feel about the UK editions. They're always so weird. This one is listed as book number 65 in their series, and Nancy, there's a lot going on here that we need to unpack. So these spiders have been reimagined as tarantulas, and there's one literally on Nancy's butt in this cover. Like, Nancy's wearing these bright green pants, and she's looking over her shoulder in just terror, and she's got this bright red mullet-like hair. There's a web behind her. It's a bizarre cover. I'm not a fan of it. But the funny cover spoofs that I came up with for this one are Nancy Drew and the not-so-itsy-bitsy spider, and then just creepy crawly things, because this last cover is just, it just gives me just hives looking at it. So yeah, if I had to give these book covers a rating, I would probably give them all a 1 magnifying glass across the board. They just don't hit for me, and they're just, spiders aside, I just am not a fan. Okay, so now really quickly, we'll discuss some of the characters that we are going to see in this mystery. So first up on our cast of characters, we have Madame Arachne Onides, who was an opera singer who was very famous. You Eugene Hovarth, who was Arachne's husband, and they had a couple of people that worked for them, Elena, who was a maid, and Sandor, who is a servant or chauffeur. There's also someone named Tad Farr and Kim Vernon, who is a pro golfer. There is Buzz Hammond, who is the River Heights Club pro. He's another golfer in the community. Simon Shand, who is a businessman. Paul Taggart, an arachnologist, which I guess he studies spiders, but who knew that was a thing? I would not like that job. Hamilton and Margot Spencer, who run the Footlighters, which you may remember this club. It's a theater club. It was mentioned in The Clue of the Dancing Puppet, an earlier book. There is Renzo Scaglia, who's a tenor singer. He knew Madame Arachne, the opera singer. Russ Chaffee, who is Kim Vernon's golf coach. Jack Vernon, who is Kim's brother. Brett Holm, who is Kim Vernon's ex-boyfriend. And Howard Emmett, who is Oscar LaRue's estate attorney. And also Tad Farr's mother factors into this mystery. So now really quickly, I'll read a brief synopsis for The Silver Cobweb. When a famous young woman disappears suddenly, Nancy Drew is faced with an even more puzzling mystery that involves the theft of a jeweled spider. Once the property of the opera diva, Madame Arachne Onides, the gemstone had supposedly passed into the possession of an unscrupulous millionaire. He hired someone to mount it on a silver cobweb necklace, but the gemstone ornament turns out to be a fake. What has happened to the real jeweled spider, and who masterminded the theft and blackmailed the missing young woman? As Nancy investigates for answers, she is led to the offshore island estate of the late opera star's husband, whose life is being menaced by the same shadowy figure intent on trapping the young sleuth. And now for a dramatically read newspaper headline synopsis. Blackmail and intrigue. Nancy Drew solves mystery of late opera singer's estate. Okay, so now let's jump into some of the direct quotes and notes that I took down for this book. So you may have noticed that Arachne Onides is not the most normal name in the world. The name of this opera singer is a bit out there and strange. So I looked up what this meant, and in case you're wondering, the book does explain this also, but Arachne is derived from the word arachnid, spider, and was a character in Greek mythology who was good at weaving and became even greater than Athena at it, according to legend. So according to the mythology, Athena and Arachne held a weaving contest, and Arachne bragged that she was better at it. So she won the contest, which enraged Athena, who ripped up her work. And in fear, Arachne took her own life, but according to the myth, Athena brought her back as a spider so she could forever weave webs. I thought this was kind of interesting. I actually remember reading a lot about Greek and Roman mythology in middle school. I went through one of those stages, if you know, you know. But had not read this story, did not know that, so kind of interesting. So anyways, our story starts off with Nancy receiving a note from New York from someone named Tad Farr, and he says that he has heard of Nancy's abilities to solve mysteries and has sent along a drawing to see what she makes of it. And the drawing is of this circular shape with curved lines shooting out from one side, and Nancy thinks that it was made by someone too old or ill to hold the pinwheel because the lines are shaky. Now, this deductive reasoning makes a lot of sense to me, but it's when Nancy looks at somebody's footprint, like left in the dirt, it cracks me up how she's like, I know what tax bracket they're in, I know what they look like, their hair color. It's like, how would you know all that though? But like knowing that somebody is ill or, you know, older based on the shakiness of the handwriting, that makes sense. So after Nancy receives this mysterious drawing and note, Bess and George show up, and Nancy has invited them over for Sunday brunch, and she shows them the drawing. And George says it kind of looks like the sun shining or maybe a spider, and Bess and Nancy both agree they think it looks like a spider too. So while they're all talking and hanging out together, Bess and George also announce that they saw Kim Vernon in town, and she's a famous pro golfer. And just the week before, she was in a tournament in Charleston and winning. She was doing really well in the tournament when she mysteriously dropped out. So George is a huge fan of the golfer. I mean, George herself herself loves golf. She's very athletic. But George says they may be able to catch her playing at the local country club if they hurry up and finish their brunch. And Nancy agrees that that sounds like a lot of fun, so she goes to help Hannah finish making the brunch, but she has to answer the ringing telephone first. And it's Tad Farr, the guy who sent Nancy the drawing in the mail, and he and Nancy talk about the drawing. And he says his mother made it after having a stroke, and he has no idea what it means. So Tad goes on to explain that he was taking care of his mother when she fell ill one morning, and she kept motioning for a pencil and paper, so he gave them to her, and she made the drawing since she couldn't talk. And Nancy agrees that she'll come up to visit her in the hospital if it will help. So after Nancy and Tad finish their conversation, Nancy hangs up, and the girls finish brunch and go to the country club where they're going to watch Kim Vernon play the local club pro, whose name is Buzz Hammond. And a news crew is already there, and someone tells the girls that Kim tried to hide from the media in the clubhouse, but then had to face the inevitable. So while Nancy is watching Kim, she spots a man going over to snoop in her golf bag, so she confronts him. And the book says he has a hooked nose and one drooping eyelid, and he shoves Nancy down and runs off. But as he's running away, Nancy sees him drop a red object, but he notices it and scoops it up before going on his way. So Nancy getting pushed down by this guy caused quite the scene, so Buzz and Kim go over to see if Nancy is okay, but a reporter follows saying Kim owes everyone an explanation for dropping out of the Charleston tournament. And Kim just says that she's said all she's going to say about it and that he needs to leave her alone. So I liked this. I mean, Kim shows it in several ways in this book, but she's a strong, independent woman with boundaries. Like, love it. So right after this, Kim thanks Nancy for saving her golf bag, and she, Nancy, Bess, and George chat about golf over some iced tea at the country club. And they split off eventually because George has to take her mom to an eye doctor appointment, but Kim says that they should go do it again sometime. So as Nancy, Bess, and George are leaving the country club, a man calls Nancy's name, so she hangs back to talk to him. And this man is named Simon Shand, and he's a businessman who made his fortune in trucking and shipping. Now, the book says that Nancy was aware that other country club members don't like him very much, and he's over the top and dresses loudly, and he, quote, bought his way into the country club. So, okay, my knowledge on country clubs is very limited, obviously, but I was under the impression that everyone always has to pay. So, I guess they're saying he bought his way in using other means? I don't know. The point is, the other country club members are not going to be cozying up to him around the caviar. So Simon Shand says that he wants to give Nancy a reward if she can catch the would-be golf bag thief. And Nancy asks why, and he just says he's a concerned citizen. So as Nancy drives away with her friends, she sees Simon Shand talking to Kim Vernon, and she just kind of files that away. I guess she thinks it's kind of suspicious. But why would this guy offer Nancy a reward? I mean, obviously, Nancy's not going to take it anyway. She never takes any kind of monetary reward whatsoever. She'll, like, accept random jewelry or little keepsakes, but she never takes money for things. So anyways, Nancy runs home to change for a date with Ned after dropping Bess and George off, and he takes her to some restaurant called the Russian Bear. And I just said, wow, the restaurants around River Heights have crazy names. So I got to thinking about this, and I was like, there was one called Pickles and Plums in The Secret of the Old Lace, I think, and then the Crow's Nest in The Clue in the Old Album. Like, there's just a lot of weird theme restaurants around River Heights. I kind of love it, though. Like, forget the Rainforest Cafe. We've got all these weird, strange restaurants, like, and it makes me wonder because they mention different restaurant names in every couple books, so I'm like, did that one just fail? Was that one, I don't see people, like, wanting to go to a place called Pickles and Plums, but that's just me. Apparently Nancy and her friends go, but it's even funnier that I made a note referencing this because I've read a couple books past this at the time that I'm recording this episode, and there's even more weird restaurant names, so don't worry, we'll talk about them when they come up. So while Nancy's on this date with Ned, Ned says that Kim Vernon's golf coach wants to talk to Nancy, and his name is Russ Chaffee, and he wants Nancy to find out why Kim withdrew from the golf tournament. And also, initially, I was getting Secret Attic vibes from this book because of spiders on the cover and the title, but with all the golf in this book, it also kind of reminds me of another earlier book, The Haunted Bridge, because in that book, Nancy plays a ton of golf. It's kind of funny, as we get later into the Nancy Drew series, I wouldn't say that plots get recycled so much, much. I mean, there's definitely elements of the books that are kind of universal, those Nancy Drew tropes, but it's interesting how they almost like pay tribute to the earlier books because we have very similar topics and similar themes. And I don't know, I think because I've read so many of the books like back to back, I start to see similarities everywhere. So Nancy agrees that she'll help Russ, and he gives her some more intel on Kim's relationships, and he says that Kim has a brother named Jack who's in politics and an ex-boyfriend, Brett Holm, who's a jewelry designer. So after this, Nancy next goes to New York with Carson, and while he meets with a client, Nancy goes to see Tad Farr's mother in the hospital, and Nancy tries to communicate with her through blinks since she's nonverbal and kind of paralyzed. She can't move very much except for her eyes, and she spells out THA, and she confirms something about a spider, but then a nurse says that Miss Farr is too tired and she needs to rest. So before leaving, Nancy talks to Tad, and she asks if there was anything unusual about the day his mother had a stroke, and he says no, there was no sign of forced entry, but his mother had been watching the TV. So Nancy wonders if this may be a clue. It sounds like a very vague clue, but knowing Nancy, she's onto something, so she decides to go to the broadcasting network's offices in New York since she's there. And I mean, I would have just consulted TV Guide, but that's just me. But maybe that wasn't a thing yet, but someone working there at the broadcasting network says a show called The Diet Chef was on around the time Ms. Farr had the stroke. That sounds like not my idea of a TV show. But anyways, Nancy asks if anything unusual happened during the TV show, and the woman says it was interrupted by a news broadcast about Kim Vernon dropping out of the golf tournament. So why would this have caused Miss Farr to have a stroke? Very strange. So after sleuthing in New York, the book says Nancy and Carson drive back to River Heights, which this was kind of a weird tidbit of information. It leads me to believe that it can't be that far away. Like, River Heights must be fairly close to New York, and I read a theory somewhere that I think Harriet Stratmeyer Adams might have moved up to that area at one point, because earlier on in the books, River Heights was said to be in the Midwest, and then I've heard several Nancy Drew fans argue that no, Nancy lives closer to New York. So in certain books, Chicago's closer to River Heights, and then in others, New York is. So there may be some truth to that. I don't know. It's kind of weird. So depending on which books you read first, whether it was the original 56 or some of the later paperbacks, that might kind of change your view on where you think Nancy Drew is from. So I don't know, kind of interesting, but I'll always see Nancy Drew as a Midwest girl. So when Nancy and Carson finally get home, Nancy is told by Hannah that she received a phone call while she was out, and the man was very unpleasant and wouldn't leave his name. So he probably was a villain. I'm guessing he didn't leave a message. So Nancy, Bess, and George go play some golf the next day, and they see Kim Vernon, and she asks to talk to Nancy in private. So she tells Nancy that she shouldn't investigate why she dropped out of the tournament, and she had her reasons, but Nancy can tell that she's scared and there's something she isn't telling her. It's almost like somebody's been threatening Kim to get her to keep quiet. So after this, Nancy gets another phone call from the rude man that Hannah said called the first time, and he tells Nancy she caused trouble for him at the golf club and to stay out of his way. So Nancy thinks it has to be the man who tried to steal Kim Vernon's golf bag. I mean, that's the thing that makes the most sense, right? Unless Nancy was elbowing people to get to the cocktail shrimp first at the country club restaurant, but I highly doubt that she was doing that. So this next little note I just thought was kind of cool, but the book says that the Drews have a vegetable garden because Hannah is picking vegetables for their dinner, and Hannah also mentions that one of Nancy's favorite meals is fried chicken and biscuits. Nancy would definitely be at home in the South. So Nancy decides that next she's going to go see Brett Holm, Kim Vernon's ex and the jewelry designer. And when she gets to his home, he's working on a web-like necklace. So Nancy starts to talk to him when all of a sudden an object flies through the window towards Brett's head. And with cat-like reflexes, Nancy pushes him out of the way. And of course she does, because she always thinks on her feet, but it turns out to be a rock, but there's no sign of who threw it. It's kind of cool though, because this scene is depicted on one of the book covers that we talked about earlier. So after this incident, Nancy attends Jack Vernon's political rally. This is Kim's brother, and Simon Shand, the businessman, is there. And Jack talks about his proposed plans for environmental cleanup, but he gets heckled by some plants in the audience, like some people that were literally put there just to heckle him, which is crazy to me. So after this, Nancy goes up to talk to Jack about Kim, but he is engrossed in gathering up papers and acts like he doesn't want to talk. And I'm sure he doesn't, because he's a politician. He doesn't want any kind of scandal touching his campaign, even if it's just his sister and the fact that she quit this tournament. So later, Nancy gets a call from Tad Farr again saying that his mother has spelled some more since Nancy's last visit, and she has spelled that girl and GOLFE. So Nancy tells him she thinks it has to do with Kim Vernon, the golfer, and she explains that she went to the broadcasting company, and she talks about how she found out that Kim Vernon's announcement that she was leaving the tournament came on when Miss Farr was watching the TV. So Nancy asks if Tad's mother had any other jobs before she was a scrub woman, because that's what he told Nancy she was when they first started talking, and Tad says that his mother was a dresser for the famous opera star Madame Arachne Onides. And Nancy tells Tad about the Greek legend of a woman being turned into a spider, the one that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. So next, after this hospital visit, Nancy talks to Bess on the phone, and when she hangs up with her, she tells Hannah and Carson that the Footlighters theater group is going to perform at something called the Ocean View Festival, and the Footlighters are a group that was mentioned in the Clue of the Dancing Puppet, but they're now run by an ex-Broadway couple, Margot and Hamilton Spencer, and the book mentions that the girls have done things with them previously, so I thought that was really cool that they had that callback. But they're going to put on a play which is called A Scream in the Dark. Sounds very spooky. But after this, Bess says that she saw in the paper where Brett Holm, the jewelry designer who dated Kim Vernon, was almost hit in the head with a rock, and Nancy was there. And again, it always cracks me up when these things that happen in the books, like, we know them because we're reading the books, but they make it into the River Heights newspaper. It's like, what kind of a slow news day were they having? This just in, man almost hit in head with rock. So after this, Nancy meets a tenor singer named Renzo Scaglia at the Footlighters performance, and he makes a comment about a past unsolved crime with an opera singer at a previous Ocean View festival. And when Nancy asks if it had to do with Madame Arachne Onides, he clams up. Something tells me it does. So Nancy and Ned run into Kim Vernon again after this while playing golf, and she asks if Brett is okay, because she's seen in the paper, that he was almost hit in the head with a rock. So Nancy again tries to talk to her, but she's not very helpful, and Nancy asks if a spider or Madame Onides may be involved, but Kim gets super upset about this and runs off. So Nancy decides that the next best course of action is to talk to Kim's coach Russ again, and he says he believes Madame Onides died in a plane crash, and also Kim got upset at an earlier golf tournament and he saw her throw away a drawing of a red spider in a clear box that had a real spider in it. Something tells me there wasn't a note on that said, "Good luck in your golf match, Kim." It was probably something way more threatening. So Kim's coach, Russ, also says that Kim may have met Madame Onides once, which is kind of interesting, so Nancy files that away. It might be important. Now, this next little note that I took down, I just thought this was cool, but Nancy and Carson go get Chinese at a restaurant called the Golden Pavilion. So this is a very direct reference to a previous mystery, the Golden Pavilion, which is book number 36. So I just thought that was really neat. So after eating dinner with Carson, Nancy gets a tip from him, and he says there's a man named Judge Drake who's a huge opera fan. So Nancy goes to see him because he might know some stuff about Madame Arachne Onides, and he's able to confirm that Madame Onides performed at the Ocean View Festival 3 years ago, and she performed Carmen, and the tenor that Nancy has already met, Renzo Scaglia, was also in the opera. So, as you can probably already tell, we're kind of starting to blend two mysteries together. We have this mystery involving this golf pro, and then we have this mystery involving this opera singer. And we also have some spiders thrown in, because why not? So, after this, Nancy goes to see the arachnologist Paul Taggart, and she remembers going on a 9th grade science field trip to his house. That sounds fun, I guess, but also scary if he's really into spiders. But Nancy asks him if there's any significance to red spiders, and he says no, but he does remember Brett Holm coming to research them a while back, which is weird because Kim Vernon has been threatened with messages with drawings of red spiders and actual red spiders. So the next day, Nancy, Bess, and George go watch the Footlighters rehearsals, and George makes the comment that she would never want to act because she's afraid she'd make a fool out of herself. But the Spencers, who run the Footlighters Club, they tell Nancy she's such a talented actress and she should be in their plays more often, which this didn't surprise me at all because Nancy Drew gets compliments like it's her job. She's so good at everything. So Nancy next tells her friends that she wonders if spiders could have been what broke up Brett and Kim's romance. And I don't know about them, but spiders did wonders for mine and my husband's relationship. I can't remember if I mentioned this in the episode The Secret in the Old Attic, but I got a huge spider in my wedding dress. It was horrible. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, or one of the scariest things, and it couldn't have happened to a better person because I am terrified of spiders. But my husband saved me. He killed the spider. Long story short, that was the best ending that could have happened because that spider could have bit me. It's scary to think about. So maybe spiders were what drove Brett and Kim apart, but to each their own. So anyways, Nancy reads an article about Kim that George gives her, and she says in the article that it would be hard for her to be married and still pursue pro golf. So later when Nancy goes by to talk to Brett, he says basically the same thing. He says he put pressure on Kim that he wishes he hadn't. Now honestly, for this book having been written in the 1980s, this was surprisingly refreshing to me because a lot of times I feel like there's an unfair, division of labor between men and women. Sometimes I feel like women are pressured to maybe not pursue a career. So this was kind of interesting and real that this is something that they argued about and something that broke up their relationship. So as Nancy's talking to Brett, she also asks about his visit with Paul Taggart, the arachnologist, several years ago, and he clams up. He doesn't want to talk about it. And Mr. Shand also calls, and Brett says that he has to leave, he wants Nancy to leave. So that's really, really odd. Why would Brett Holm and Mr. Shand even be meeting? So Nancy decides to play along and she pretends to leave Brett's workshop. She's just like, okay, bye. But she pulls over where she can hide on the side of the road and watch to see where he goes. So Brett drives to an overlook and then he gets out and he paces for a while, but then he heads home. So he lied about meeting someone. He just really wanted Nancy to leave because he was tired of her asking so many questions. I mean, fair enough. Nancy Drew is kind of known for asking super invasive questions. So after this, Nancy goes home and she finds Hannah is unconscious and laying in the foyer. So Hannah comes to and she explains that she was picking some tomatoes in the garden when she came back in and she heard a noise. And this man barreled past her through the house and knocked her down. And she tells Nancy that he had a crooked nose and a drooping eyelid. So it's the same would-be thief from the country club that tried to steal Kim Vernon's golf bag. I just always think it's super funny how in the Nancy Drew books they have to give these villains unattractive identifiers, like he had a hooked nose or he limped everywhere he walked, or it's kind of comical. Like what? Attractive people can't commit crimes? I believe they can. So Nancy calls Chief McGinnis to report everything, and he says he'll come by the house. And so when he gets there, they look around the Drews' residence, but nothing is missing. And Nancy also makes a sketch of the thief and gives it to Chief McGinnis to help find him. And I think the last time we saw Nancy doing some sketching was maybe in Secret of the Wooden Lady, or possibly The Strange Message in the Parchment. But Nancy's apparently pretty artistic. If it were me, though, I would be trying to draw a sketch sketch of the villain, and they would just be like, that looks like Mr. Potato Head, and we're never going to catch this person. So after talking to Chief McGinnis, Nancy goes to visit Simon Shand, the businessman again, and give a progress report on the thief, and also ask if he's withholding anything from her. And he calls her some super condescending things like girly, and when Nancy mentions the red spider object that she saw the thief drop at the golf course, he can't get her to leave fast enough. It's like as soon as red spider is out of Nancy's mouth, he's like, oh, look at the time, I actually have somewhere to be. That's pretty suspicious. So Nancy and her crew of friends go to help the Footlighters Theater Company set up for the Ocean View Festival, and there's no mentioning of Bert at all. Like, it's just Ned and Dave, which I found this super fascinating because usually Bert's involved. Like, he goes wherever Ned and Dave go, so I'm just kind of confused. Like, did George and Bert have a falling out? Where is Bert? Justice for Bert. Like, is he on vacation? I don't know. Maybe we won't see him again. Surely we'll see him again. Like, there's so many more books left in the series. Like, I'll have to keep an eye on this and let you know. Like, maybe Bert's, like, lost at sea or something. So while Nancy and her friends are helping with the Footlighters, George says something about being hungry, and Bess says, hey, that's my line. Now, this was kind of funny, actually, because it almost felt like they were breaking the fourth wall, like whoever wrote this or Ghost wrote it, and making fun of Bess and George's dynamics instead of making fun of Bess. Because I will not take any slander against Bess Marvin, okay? So next, Nancy goes to talk to Renzo Scaglia at the theater for the festival, and she asks if he wants to tell her the story of the mystery surrounding Madame Arachne-Onides, but he's suddenly changed his tune and he doesn't want to talk about it. But he does tell Nancy that the late opera singer died in a plane crash, and he says that she was a mess of contradictions, and Nancy gets the feeling that he might have loved her. But before he can answer, though, a man arrives, and Renzo introduces him as Eugene Hovarth, the late husband of Arachne-Onides. Now, Nancy recognizes Mr. Hovarth because she saw him leaving Brett Holmes' studio the other day, and Renzo Scaglia doesn't seem to like him at all, and he warns Nancy that he likes to collect famous people. So Nancy talks to Mr. Hovarth and finds out that he was Madame Arachne-Onides' business manager before he married her. So I just wrote down, I smell a rat. Like, this seems like a toxic relationship. Like, I don't know. Anytime somebody deals with somebody's financials and then they end up dating them, it seems kind of weird. It's just like, were you after them or were you after their money? You know? So Nancy asks him about Maggie Farr, who is Tad Farr's mother, who apparently was the dresser of Madame Arachne, like she helped her get ready with all her costumes before the operas would be put on. And Mr. Hovarth does remember her, but he doesn't know what the reference to red spiders could be. He just is like, I've never heard of that before. But he does say that his wife helped Brett Holmes' jewelry become popular amongst celebrities because she was often seen wearing it. So after this, Nancy goes to see Kim Vernon, the golf player, who does still have feelings for Brett Holmes, and she says she's going to play some tennis in her downtime from golfing, and this delivery guy shows up, and he brings her a tennis racket that she bought. But this is no ordinary tennis racket, so Kim gets incredibly upset when she sees this tennis racket, and so Nancy looks closer at it, and the strings have been pulled into a cobweb design. So Nancy runs after the man who delivered the tennis racket, noticing that he has no uniform and he might not even be an official delivery person, and so he's driving an unlabeled brown sedan, and she follows him to a warehouse, and when she enters, the man knocks her over the head, and when Nancy comes to, she's tied up. So I think it's safe to say this wouldn't have happened if it was Amazon, so this was not an actual delivery driver, and that was an obvious threat involving spiders, again, made against Kim Vernon. So Nancy's tied up in this warehouse. Nobody knows where she is, but she's able to roll over to her purse on the floor and find her nail file. So she begins to work on loosening her bonds with that nail file. But once she's freed, she finds out that the door is locked. So of course, Nancy could knock on the door and yell, but nobody's probably around, and anyone who is around is not going to let her out because they're probably the people that locked her in there in the first place. So this is when Nancy does something truly genius. So she takes her magnifying glass out of her purse because, of course, she's got one handy, and there's a spare piece of paper, so she uses a beam of sunlight and she gets it to start smoking to set off a smoke detector, and then the fire alarm goes off. So I've actually seen people do this. I used to have a neighbor named Carl. He was the sweetest little old man, but he would light his cigar using a magnifying glass and the sun, and it was just the coolest thing to watch. But the fact that Nancy does this, I was like, oh, go Nancy. So the fire department shows up and they save Nancy, and she reports the sedan's license plate number to Chief McGinnis. And later he calls Nancy back and he says that they found the car, but it was stolen. So of course that's a little bit of a dead end, but Chief McGinnis also says that he spoke to Kim Vernon and she didn't have a good description of the delivery man, and she threw the racket in the river. So she threw their one piece of evidence into the river. Way to go, Kim. But Nancy goes to talk to her brother, Jack Vernon, and she says that she needs his help and wants explanations. Because everyone in this circle, like Kim, Jack, Brett Holm, they're all acting really suspicious whenever Nancy mentions spiders. So someone's threatening them with spiders. So Jack says that he can't talk at their headquarters and Nancy will have to meet him at a local park tomorrow night. So Nancy agrees, and after this she decides to go to the library and read up on Madame Arachne. And while she's there, she finds a picture of her in the archives wearing, dun dun dun, a red spider piece of jewelry. And the jewelry was valued at $500,000 and was stolen out of her dressing room. So this is the crime that Renzo Scaglia spoke of. But when Nancy goes to see the Footlighters play, Renzo suddenly doesn't want Nancy to try and solve the case anymore, when it's like, you brought it up, dude. You're the one that told Nancy about it, so now why are you backtracking? But Nancy pries it out of him, and he says that he was playing Don Jose in Carmen the night that Madame Arachne's brooch was stolen during the second act, and the performance was ruined and the police were called. Also, this is just a random note and an aside that I wrote down, but Bess plays a secretary in the play, and I think it's so neat that she's an actress. Like, she acted in the book A Race Against Time, which we read a couple weeks back, and I just love that Bess has hobbies outside of helping Nancy solve mysteries. So after the performance, the girls get an invitation to Moonlight Island, which is some place that belongs to Eugene Hovarth, and it used to belong to the late Madame Arachne Onides, and he says that his servant Sandor will pick them up. That's a very fun and different name. But anyways, the girls go to the island, and they also meet the maid, whose name is Elena, and Mr. Hovarth shows them film of his late wife singing, but eventually he pulls Nancy aside and he tells her that he's scared because a threat has been made on his life. So he says he's gotten threatening calls from some man named Sweeney Flint, so that's kind of his ulterior motive for inviting them to the island. I'm sorry, but every time I read the name Sweeney Flint, I couldn't help but think of Sweeney Todd. So the girls end up staying overnight at Eugene Hovarth's mansion on this island, and this was just kind of weird to me because it's like, he's a widower, they're teenage girls, he's made comments about how beautiful they are. I don't know, it was just very weird to me. But anyways, in the middle of the night, an alarm sounds and Hovarth screams for help. So someone tried to climb the balcony into his room, and Hovarth describes the man as a squinty-eyed man with a crooked nose. So again, the thief from the golf course. And Sandor, his manservant, comes back from running around outside, and he says he took off in a submarine. Like, okay, I don't know where these villains get these modes of transportation, but okay. So after this visit to Moonlight Island, Nancy next goes to see Brett Holm, and he's super tight-lipped, and he refuses to tell Nancy who he commissioned the web necklace for that she saw him working on towards the beginning of the book, and he won't tell her if he designed the red spider brooch for Madame Arachne either. The suspects and the victims in this book are super unhelpful. So after this, Nancy goes to meet Jack Vernon in the park, and she finds him unconscious. So she calls the police, and an ambulance and Chief McGinnis show up, and Nancy explains that she was meeting the politician but no one else knew about it, and Chief McGinnis wonders if Jack's office is possibly bugged. And later, sure enough, there is a bug found in a lamp in his office, and Nancy also thinks that Sweeney Flint may be the squinty guy. So next, Brett Holm contacts Nancy, and he says that he wants to talk because a bomb was placed in his car, but luckily it it ended up being a dud. So now I guess he's decided that the threats are not worth it and he wants to confide in Nancy. So Nancy finally gets Brett and Kim to agree to talk to her. Now, at this point in the mystery, Tad Farr calls Nancy again and he says that his mother has made a full recovery and she's speaking now, and so he asks if Nancy can come back to New York, and Nancy agrees. But before she does that, Nancy talks to Kim and she has a breakthrough in the case because Kim tells Nancy that she helped put her brother Jack through graduate school on her golf pro salary, but their financial situation was precarious, and she says that Jack stole Madame Arachne's spider jewelry, and he was tricked into doing so by a fake publicity man who said that the opera singer was a fading star and he wanted to generate publicity for her via this fake robbery. So Jack fell for it, and he was told that he would get paid well for stealing it and the jewelry would be returned shortly after, so no harm done. But unfortunately, according to Kim, the robbery was very real and Jack and Kim have been blackmailed about it ever since. I'm sorry, but this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, if someone asks you to steal something, like, no, you just don't, like, go get another job, go sell something, I don't know, but like, I know they were in like dire straits, they were trying to save themselves financially, but stealing is never the answer. So anyways, Kim came clean to Madame Arachne later and she told her, she said, yeah, my brother stole your brooch, but Madame Arachne wasn't upset and she said she had insurance on the brooch, but Kim got a letter from the blackmailer that said, someday I'll give you an order, just obey it and nothing will happen to your brother, along with a picture of Jack during the robbery. So Kim also confesses to Nancy that she was blackmailed to lose the Charleston golf match or her brother's political career would be ruined. So instead of losing deliberately, Kim just withdrew from the match. I guess that was just her small bit of resistance to the person making threats against them. So at this point, Brett Holm takes up his part of the story and he tells Nancy that he designed the spider jewelry for Madame Arachne and it was made of rubies. And he also says that he was later approached by Simon Shand to commission a silver cobweb necklace and he wanted Madame Arachne's red spider jewelry to fit on it. But when Brett reminded him that it was stolen and gone and nobody knows where it is, he had just laughed and said, that's what everyone thinks. But according to Kim and Brett, someone named Sweeney Flint was behind the whole robbery plot. This Sweeney Flint guy gets around. So Simon Shand also, according to Brett, says he obtained the red spider jewelry completely legally, I'm sure. He said he bought it from someone named Oscar LaRue, who bought it from Madame Arachne. So Brett says that he also got a threatening phone call from someone after the rock was thrown through the window earlier in the book, and the person said they'd aim with something worse than a rock next time and they wouldn't miss. These threats are getting much scarier. So Brett Holm tells Nancy that the mysterious caller was also convinced that Simon Shand has a glass knockoff of the jewelry piece. So there's a real jewelry piece and a fake one floating around out there. Now, after talking to Brett and Kim, Nancy next goes to see Maggie and Tad Farr in New York. And Maggie says that Madame Arachne really did sell her brooch, but she let Kim Vernon think that her brother stole the real brooch, but it was the fake one. So she had to sell it because she was up to her eyeballs in debt, and she didn't want to admit that to the people around her. Honestly, that's really messed up that you would let somebody believe that they stole something in order to save face. Like, this is really messed up in a lot of ways. The blackmailing and then stealing something for financial gain anyway. Just, these people are all around just bad people. So after this, Nancy picks up Bess to go see Jack Vernon, who's recovering from being attacked in the park, and on the way there, Nancy notices a large spider dangling from her rear view mirror. This was kind of relatable because I've had a spider in my car before and it almost caused me to wreck. It was so horrible. It just like dropped down on my lap and I don't even know how it got into my car. So Nancy luckily keeps her calm more than I would in that situation, and she catches the spider in a bag and ties it off. And she wants to take it back to Paul Taggart, the arachnologist, to ask if he knows what kind of species it is. So Nancy and Bess put the little bag with the spider in it to the side, and when they get to see Jack Vernon, he tells Nancy that he's also gotten threatening phone calls and he was held at knife point that night in the park, which is really scary. Now, after Nancy and Bess finish talking to Jack, they go talk to Paul Taggart, and he identifies the spider Nancy found in her car as a wolf spider, which they're so nasty. Don't look them up. Don't Google them. Don't Google any spiders. Like, I'm getting, I felt like something was crawling on my leg just now. Like, I just can't even talk about them. But Paul says that the wolf spider and also a black widow were stolen from his collection, which, why do you have a collection of spiders? Why? That's so gross. Nope. Like, I would not go in a house of anybody that I knew that collected spiders. But it's funny that a black widow was stolen, because I feel like this was kind of a callback to Secret in the Old Attic. And my husband Tim, he actually had a black widow that we found in his car once early on, like when we were dating. We had to fumigate the car because I was like, I don't think that I can date you if there's black widows in your car. Like, it was just this whole thing. I was like, let's get a bug bomb in this car. So Nancy, Bess, and George go to the festival again, and Nancy talks to Simon Shand, who says he arranged the threats against Brett and Jack, and he isn't even shy about it. Like, he has no remorse whatsoever, which fits well with his character. But it's at this point in the book when Nancy also gets a black widow on her in bed at the hotel they're staying at, and this wasn't as bad as that scene in Secret in the Old Attic when Nancy's tied up and she literally can't get away. At least in this instance, she was able to jump out of bed and get away from it. So after that horror fest, Nancy goes to talk to Howard Emmett, who was Oscar LaRue's estate attorney, and Oscar LaRue is the man that Simon Shand claimed that he got the jewelry from, Madame Arachneonide's jewelry, and Nancy sees there's a tie to Sweeney Flint in a book of LaRue's and jots down a phone number. Now, shortly after this, Nancy gets a lead from Chief McGinnis on Sweeney's phone number, which leads her to a building in New York, but it's kind of just a dead end. Like, I don't know why we had to have this dead end at this point in the story. It's kind of late in the story. But I'm also surprised that Aunt Eloise didn't make an appearance, because Nancy was in New York a lot in this book. Also, I promise I'm not popping popcorn. There's actually a little summer thunderstorm going on right now, and there's like hail hitting the window. It's perfect for podcasting. So next, Nancy and Ned end up going back to Eugene Hovarth's, and he says he saw Sweeney Flint at his window again. But it turns out, in a bizarre twist, Eugene Hovarth is actually Sweeney Flint. So he and Sandor, his manservant guy, plotted and wore a fake nose, and so he tries to attack Nancy with a candlestick holder, and Nancy pulls the rug out from under him, literally. And at the end of the book, Ned kisses Nancy and calls her his sweet little mystery solver. And that's the end of the book. So now let's go on to a little segment that I like to call What's Cooking. So in the Silver Cobweb, we saw mentionings of Nancy eating a bunch of blueberry pancakes, bacon, milkshake, and a sandwich, iced tea in a sandwich, roast, soup and salad, juice, fried chicken and biscuits, which is apparently her favorite, cocoa, mugu gai pan, meat pie and apple tart, cold chicken and strawberries and ice cream, hamburgers, french fries, and yet again another milkshake, and some German potato salad. That's a lot. I probably make you guys really hungry with this segment. Now let's discuss some of the things that I think Nancy could add to her resume. So Nancy's a fire starter. She started a fire with nothing more than a piece of paper and a magnifying glass, and she's a spider wrangler. She wrangled that black widow in the hotel room, and then she wrangled that red spider that was in her car. Now really quickly, let's talk about some of the things I liked and didn't like about the Silver Cobweb. So the things I liked, there was kind of a fun twist at the end. I mean, I kind of had a feeling that Eugene Hovarth was just a bad guy. I mean, he married Madame Arachneonides after he was her financial advisor, which is just super sketch to me, but it was still kind of a fun twist. The fake nose was unexpected, but the things I didn't like the spiders. I really didn't like the opera. I mean, I've never been a fan of opera, so I don't know. It was kind of lost on me, and most of the book was just kind of boring. I don't know. It just wasn't a favorite for me. So when it comes to giving it a book rating, I would probably have to give it a 1 magnifying glass. This is probably a Nancy Drew book that I don't see myself rereading. Like, I'm making this list mentally in my head of the really, really good ones and then the ones that I'm just kind of meh about. So that concludes today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. For next week's episode, we're going to be talking about the Haunted Carousel. And no, not the Nancy Drew computer game, but the book that the game is based on. And there's some similarities, but there's a lot that's different. So if you like carousel horses and theme parks and people who vacation on riverboats, then you're definitely going to like this one. Until next time, thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at True Drew Podcast.